Atu Quayson stood before his father's desk, his spine straight and his resolve locked in place. It had taken him a lot to come here, more courage than he wanted to admit he'd needed. He was a man now, damn it. 24 going on 71, older aunt liked to say while teasking. He suspected this conversation was going to disintegrate into yet another battle of wills. All his conversations with his father had since he'd hit puberty, since he'd become starkly cognizant of the fact that he would always be second best. The spare to the true heir of the Quayson dynasty, his brother Fifi, and yet fight he did, because to stop fighting for what he wanted was to wither away and fade into inconsequence. Unfortunately for Joseph Quayson, this particular son had no intention of doing any such thing. Silence throbbed as he awaited his father's response to the terms he'd just laid down. He watched the man who'd sired him rise and stroll to the large window on the second floor of their home, set on its own proud hill in the prestigious Quayson Hills enclave in Accra, Ghana. Atu didn't need to join his father at the window to know what was happening below. The sounds of thumping music, laughter, and gaiety marking his older brother's 25th birthday party were well within earshot. Over 600 guests were spread out across the extensive grounds. He should be there mingling with friends and acquaintances while fending off hangers-on, hoping to get deeper into the Quayson inner circle. She was down there too. Amelie Hayford, the woman with the surname that made her forbidden fruit. And as with forbidden fruit, he'd been unable to tear his thoughts from her since their encounter a few weeks ago. Or how she'd moved on the dance floor. His lips twisted at the thought of dropping her name into this conversation with his father. It would end this meeting most conclusively, the feud between the Quaysons and Hayfords seeming to have picked up steam in the past year. But he stayed put because he'd postponed this conversation for weeks. After an age, his father faced him, his hands braced behind his back. "You seem to think there's room for negotiation here. There isn't, son. Your brother takes over the majority of the family business next week. You're needed here in Ghana to assist him with whatever he needs." Atu futilely tried to stop the arrow of anguish that pierced him at hearing those words from his father's lips, at the utter lack of recognition of the pain he was causing his own son by relegating him callously to second best. A flash of the self-pity he used to feel when his father spoke in such terms threatened to resurface. He ruthlessly suppressed it. He would cut off a limb before he let his father see the pain his words caused. "I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you, father." Again, he wanted to add, because hadn't he been a disappointment in his father's eyes for as long as he could remember? "My plans are already in place. I'm meeting with developers in Abu Dhabi in 10 days to discuss a possible collaboration." Fury lit his father's dark brown eyes. "You have no business gallivanting around the world on a voyage of discovery. You are needed here." "The miners are revolting, and the continent-wide expansion of the bank is at a delicate stage." He knew all of this, had counted on leverage it might give him. "Fine. If you want me to stay put, me in charge of one branch. Make me CEO of one of the businesses. The bank is your desired project, so I'll take the mining concern if need be. I would prefer the resorts, but I can start with the miners, negotiate with them to reach an agreeable settlement." His father's eyes narrowed. "Are you trying to tell me how to manage this family's business?" He clipped out the words. Atu sighed inwardly, still attempting to hold the hurt at bay. "No, Dad. You know best, of course, but I'm afraid your best is not good enough for me anymore." Shock mingled with the fury in his father's eyes. "What did you say to me?" he grated. Atu tensed his spine, while inside him something screamed. "This is your chance. Show me a little acceptance, that I mean something to you." A moment ticked by then, too. 5. His spirit sagged as his father's rigid expression remained. You heard me. I'm done playing a supporting role. I'm going into business on my own. Mboasim. He tossed out the word for nonsense. You won't get to the end of the street. I'll cut you off before I let you disrespect me and our family name like this. You want to claim the black sheep title you've been toying with? Go ahead. See how far you get out there in the world without me. The vice around Atu's chest tightened so much he couldn't breathe, but he powered through it, even managed a shrug. Do what you must. You always do anyway. He left the study, his father's condemnation ringing in his ears. Downstairs, several friends tried to greet him. He ignored them all, heading to the nearest liquor cabinet and pouring himself 2 fingers of whiskey and tossing it back before slamming the crystal on the shiny countertop. The bracing liquor seemed to melt the knot inside him, leaving him vulnerable to other emotions. Dejection. Even a hint of self-loathing for his inability to fall in line. He gave a low laugh. His father had asked him to claim his black sheep title. Little did he know Atu had felt like that for years now. Had felt as if he didn't belong in this family. Fifi and his younger brother Ekau seemed to understand how to navigate their relationships with their father, while grabbing the bottle, he poured himself another drink, but didn't drink it immediately. While getting drunk, held a tempting appeal he couldn't succumb tonight. Spinning around, he searched amongst the guests for his older brother, the conversation they'd had a few times now swirling through his brain. Instead, he looked straight into the eyes of the woman who continued to plague his waking moments. An unnerving hunger that had awakened inside him when he'd seen her a few weeks ago blazed as shockingly bright now. The shy, introverted girl he remembered had undergone a transformation his body didn't want him to forget. He gave a grim smile as he watched her. He was the black sheep, the son who dared to ask for more and was being tossed out because his father had no use for him, save for bolstering his brother's accomplishments. Tangling with Amelie Hayford was as good as tossing a vat of kerosene on an already raging inferno. He had to remember that. And yet he couldn't take his eyes off her. He was here, at last. A decadent shiver coursed through Amelie Hayford as her avid gaze tracked the second Quayson sun across the vast terrace to the bar. She watched him reach for a bottle and pour a drink, imagining those long, elegant fingers of his caressing her skin, much like she had for weeks now, ever since their night in the club. But it went further back than that. She'd been pining for glimpses of him since she'd returned from England and first caught sight of him while she'd been dropping off her sister at the Quayson mansion. He hadn't seen her then, had been too absorbed in the tablet he'd been using while lounging by the pool. But that impact of first sight after 2 years of being away studying at university had been intensely electric. The nightclub interaction had merely cinched things for her. He'd been all she'd thought about in the last 3 weeks. She'd thought about him as she'd dressed for the party tonight, every stitch of clothing on her body picked with Atu in mind. The feminist part of her cringed at the thought of prettying herself up for a man. But the teenage girl with a crush had turned into a woman who knew her mind. That woman raised her chin in challenge at the idea of going against her own desires. She wanted to look beautiful tonight. Granted, she paled in comparison to the stunning heiresses and supermodel types prancing about here tonight, but she squared her shoulders. She would make Atu Quayson take notice of her, even if she had to strip naked in the middle of the party to get his attention. Why that image didn't bother her as much as it should have indicated how far gone she was. She stared into her drink. The second one of the evening. She'd told the bartender to make it weak, but she suspected he hadn't heeded her instruction. No matter. Her feelings about Atu had been deeply entrenched in her long before an ounce of alcohol had hit her system. Her thoughts fled as she raised her glass and met his electric gaze. He was magnificent. Even in full brooding mode, he was a sight to behold. And not just because his bespoke silk suit clung in all the right places. Not because his coarse black hair and that designer stubble he sported gleamed under the lights, lending him a vitality her fingers itched to explore. The clothes were just window dressing for the majesty of the man beneath, a man who carried himself like a god. His belief in his masculinity oozing from every pore, with the kind of confidence she wished she could emulate to the smallest degree. One eyebrow slowly lifted, and Amelie realized she'd been gaping at him for the better part of a minute. Once upon a time, she would have cowered, cringed with embarrassment, and probably hightailed it behind the nearest pillar. But perhaps those moments on the dance floor and the drive up the hills in his car hadn't been a total waste after all. Because she didn't cower, didn't allow herself a moment of doubt as she took one step, then another, didn't stop until she stood in front of the man who brought color into her life, who made her feel alive. She was the last person he wanted to see, the last person he should permit himself to be around in his current mood. He needed to find his brothers Fifi, in particular, and tell them what he'd planned, what their father was driving him to do. And yet he couldn't move, couldn't look away from the siren gaze locked on him. The more he was around her, the more he noticed interesting things about her. Like the way she bit the inside of her cheek before she issued a subtle challenge. The way her eyes met his before glancing away. Shades of her innocence remained, but Amelie showed all the hallmarks of being a force to be reckoned with one day. Shame he wouldn't be around to witness it. "But you're here now," the infernal devil on his shoulder whispered. He ignored it, while the hand that wanted to stroke her cheek, test for himself if that hint of a dimple was real or imagined, tightened around his glass. "You should leave, Amelie." He forced the words out. "Go find someone else to party with." She flicked a dismissive hand at him. "You keep warning me to stay away, yet I sense the opposite desire in you." His lips twisted. "Are you confirming that you're indeed a sorceress?" She laughed, and he was too entranced to do anything but gape. Sweet heaven. He'd thought her alluring that night at the club. Tonight, Amelie Hayford had pulled out all the stops. Her dress was a gold one-shoulder-bearing design that hugged her full chest and narrow waist before flowing down her curves to end at her knees. The style would have been harmless were it not for the fact that he couldn't drag his attention from the smooth, flawless lines of her neck and shoulders, the perfect ochre of her skin, and his heart-stopping desire to trace every piece of her perfection with his lips. He couldn't catch a full breath as his gaze traveled down over her supple hips to her endless legs and the strappy heels he wanted hell needed digging into his back as he thrust hard and true inside her. In that moment, Atu didn't think he'd wanted anything more. "If I were then, I wouldn't forever be attempting to discover why you're always quietly furious at the world." Her insight alarmed him enough to drag his focus from her hips to her face. Not the whole world, just one person in particular. Eyes emphasized with subtle makeup, making them alluring pools he wanted to dive headlong into, peered at him. "Who?" He opened his mouth to tell her, then stopped himself. He couldn't forget who she was, what she meant to his family. As much as he was furious with his father, loyalty was a trait he couldn't shrug off easily. "Take my advice and leave." He infused as much iciness into his tone as possible, one part of him already regretting it, while the other damned her for putting him in this position in the first place. Already several guests and family members were casting them searching looks, attempting to gather gossip they could feed on later. But far from heeding his warning, she did the unthinkable. She stepped into his space and stared up at him. Or what? What are you going to do, Atu? I could have you thrown out. That would put an end to whatever this is, he drawled, flicking his fingers between them. Yes, you could, but your brother wouldn't take kindly to you treating the sister of the woman he loves that way, would he? She replied. No, he didn't think his brother would like that one bit. Where is he anyway? He demanded, glancing past her to stop himself from staring at her some more, to stop being consumed alive by the electricity that sparked so effortlessly every time she was close. You need to escape me that badly. Again, that hint of hurt and innocence that tugged at something inside him, a belief perhaps that everything wasn't so dire. That somewhere within her there was some gentleness that could sustain a soul. That ache triggered a deeper yearning that alarmed him. You think you can handle me? He taunted lightly, hoping she'd take the hint and retreat. But he was learning that not backing down wasn't just a Quayson trait. The Hayford women, this one in particular, had it in spades. No one has accused me of not giving a worthy cause my best shot. Against his better judgment, he was intrigued. He added, You think I'm a worthy cause? Her gaze traveled from the top of his head to his hand-stitched shoes and back again. And Atu had never felt this exposed. Never felt the urge to pivot away from her gaze, shield himself from whatever it was she saw. Not even when his father had threatened to strip him of every brick of support had he felt as vulnerable as he did now. I haven't decided yet. Stop trying to push me away, and I'll let you know by the end of the night. What have you got to lose? Harsh laughter barked from his throat. What have I got to lose? Surely you can't be that naive. The obvious matters between our families aside, of course. But need I remind you that your parents invited me and my family to this party? To avoid scandal, which you seem hell-bent on creating, he replied. By just talking to you. If this is your definition of scandalous behavior, I'm intrigued to discover what you'll think when your brother and my sister announce whatever it is they've been keeping under wraps lately. He frowned, the reminder making him scour the room for his elusive brother. She answered his silent query. They were in the gazebo when I last saw them, in the middle of what I can only assume was another lover's quarrel. Her sigh was equal measures concern and something else. Something like the emotion he'd been secretly harboring himself. Not envy exactly. More like a need to understand this thing between his brother and Essie Hayford that was altering the brother he loved seemingly on a molecular level. He refused to believe it was love. Love was supposed to be gentle, benign, warm feelings and mutual contentment. Wasn't it? Do you know what it is? He asked. Her mouth twisted in a flash of unhappiness before she regained her composure. Essie won't tell me. Claims it's a surprise. Do you know? Atu's thoughts darted to the snippets of conversation he'd had with his brother since that night at the club. In between heading off his father's pressure, he'd tried to find out what his older brother had meant. Fifi had been as frustratingly vague as he'd been that night more often than not, absenting himself from the Quayson group's head office in Accra altogether. With the conversation Atu had had with their father tonight, he knew he couldn't put off a serious discussion any longer. But he wasn't about to divulge all of that to the woman in front of him, so he changed the subject. His gaze dropped to the glass she held. How many of those have you had? She wasn't slurring her words, nor did she appear intoxicated, but he needed to be sure. Not enough, obviously. I can feel my fingers and toes, and I can see your clear evasion. Dear God, she made his blood burn. Setting his own glass down, he stepped closer to her. There was one way to make this night pass faster, and he was done with denying himself. You want to play? Let's play. Amelie had been to the Quayson mansion often enough to know its layout, to know that he was leading her away from the heart of the party, spread out on the immense back terrace and manicured lawn behind the house, that the guest suite on the ground floor in the east wing was down the hallway he was leading her through. Rooms as exquisitely appointed as every other room in this stunning mansion. Between her third and fourth heartbeat, they were shut behind a solid marble door. The fingers he'd laced with hers after relieving her of her glass dropped, but he didn't step back. If anything, he crowded her further, bracing his hands against the wall on either side of her shoulders. Close enough, but not touching much to her displeasure. "It's not too late, Amelie. This is your last chance to end this," he breathed against her earlobe. She lifted her hands, placed them on his chest, her stomach diving with excitement when his warmth seeped into her touch. "No," she stated firmly, a holy conviction lighting up inside her. "I'm not leaving. Not when I think you need—" She bit the inside of her lip, wondering if this was the right time to voice what she'd seen beneath the surface of his formidable expression. That she sensed he was troubled about something. Did she even have the right to tell him to unburden to her when she'd been relieved to be halfway across the world and away from the acrimony still existing between their families? When she'd hoped that somehow it would have resolved itself by the time she was done with university, but was at a loss for how she could contribute to the elusive peace. "What do you think I need?" She shook her head, her earlier brazenness momentarily deserting her. One hand dropped from the wall, and his large palm cradled her jaw. "Don't get shy with me now," he crooned, his voice almost hypnotic. She wasn't fooled. Beneath that suave exterior lurked a predator, and she was aware she'd pushed him with her boldness the last time they'd seen each other. Stoked the fire she could see burning in his eyes when he looked at her. Now she was reaping the results, and while a part of her leapt in delight, another part wondered if she truly knew what she was doing, if she wouldn't bear the repercussions of what happened here tonight for the foreseeable future. But then his thumb brushed over her lower lip, leaving a trail of fire. That fire obliterated any other thought, any other need save the one that directed her to stay exactly where she was, to revel in this moment, which felt like it had been a lifetime in the making. "You need this," she whispered. "I can't deny that I do," he agreed gruffly, his eyes darkening until they were almost black, save for the blaze sizzling right at her. "I can't deny that I've wanted to do this for far too long. Thought about it far too often." A thrill unlike any she'd ever known lit through her. "Then do it. Don't make us both wait," she said, her voice shamefully breathless. For the longest time, he didn't respond, just continued that maddening caress of her lower lip, until she parted her lips and licked the pad of his thumb. His sharp exhale and tight groan lit another fuse inside her. Amelie. She wasn't sure whether he said her name in warning or in surrender. She'd tasted his skin and yearned for more. So she sucked his thumb into her mouth, a moan shuddering up from her throat at the utterly blissful sensations pummeling her. "God, that's—" His nostrils flared, and suddenly his body was surging against hers, leaving her in no doubt that he was equally affected. "You mean to drive me out of my mind, don't you?" She hummed, content to let him take whatever meaning he wanted. A shudder went through him, and in the next moment he dragged his digit free, his chest heaving as he stared down at her, his gaze glazed with bewilderment. She trailed the hands still braced on that heaving chest upwards beneath the fall of his jacket opening. For a moment, she wondered whether she was brave enough. Then, with a firm heave, she pushed the jacket off his shoulders. He seemed slightly stunned by her move, and then he was helping her, shifting his body to divest himself of the heavy clothing, Then freed, he slid his arms around her waist, pinned her to his tall, hot body as he lowered his head and took her mouth in a searing kiss. At last! Amelie had known from the start that when it happened, a kiss from Atu would be a cosmic event. She was both thrilled and terrified that it turned out to be so. He was masterful and immediately addictive, driving pleasure through her body again and again until she was suffused with it. Tongues playfully dueled, and possessed teeth nipped, soothed, and nipped harder, dragging unashamed cries from her soul. His muscles rippled beneath her fingers as she eagerly explored him, dragged her nails over his nape. Groaning, he tore his lips from hers, his eyes alight with a hunger that matched hers. I could kiss these lips for an eternity. He followed his words with a firm hold on her behind, using the leverage to tug her even closer as he took possession of her lips once more. His erection pressed against her until she wanted to sob and plead with him to fulfill the need mounting inside her. But to do that, she would have had to stop kissing him. And kissing Atu Quayson was a euphoric experience that now that she'd lived it, she never wanted to end. Time ceased to exist, the hum and gaiety of the party, a distant memory as they gorged on one another, sighing and groaning with each caress. Amelie could barely breathe the second time he eased away the ache and throb between her thighs, matching the desire in her heart. She wanted this man more than she'd wanted anything in her life. And when he caught her wrists and raised her arms to pin them above her head, she willingly obliged. His curiosity had been satisfied. Her skin was the very definition of silk. Her passion bordered on unbridled. There was that hint of innocence that seemed only to sharpen his arousal, the desire swelling inside him to tutor her to better expend that passion. But he should stop. He'd had a taste of Amelie Hayford. He could walk away knowing he'd laid that particular ghost to rest. He'd never intended this to go beyond the need to teach her not to play with fire. But even before they'd moved from the bar to this room, he knew it was beyond that. His own needs overruled him, and here now, with her arms pinned obediently above her head, her lips bruised from his kisses, and her sweet pants echoing in the lust-soaked space they inhabited, he could no more walk away than he could stop breathing. The zipper of her dress was visible now that her arms were up. He caught it between his fingers and dragged it down to her waist. Her unbound breasts spilled free. A thick groan erupted from his chest as he watched the very epitome of forbidden fruit spilling out in wicked temptation. One taste, then he would end this madness. He had to, at the very least, to save her from the repercussions should his father find out who he was dallying with. He wasn't his brother. His father would find a way to make someone pay, and she didn't deserve that. Was that his only consideration? He shook his head, unwilling to examine what else it could be. But the question pushed back at him. Was it because deep down he didn't deserve this? Wasn't worthy of what he was about to take anyway? The flow of the air conditioning passed over her, and she shivered. Her nipples puckered, and dear God, he wasn't strong enough to resist. With his free hand, he molded one breast, his tongue thickening in this mouth as the gorgeous peak hardened further beneath his touch. Unable to resist, he dropped his head and sucked one dark pearl into his mouth. Her taste exploded on his tongue once again, dragging another groan from deep within. Her hitched cry spurred him on, and he savored her again and again until he could barely stand. He delivered the same treatment to the twin peak, gorging himself until her pleas sounded in his ears, penetrating his drunken senses. What is it? Do you want more? Her lips parted on a sharp exhale and her head bobbed up and down. Please, she rasped. He staggered back a step so he could better take her in. Something shuddered through him, sharp need mingled with awe that stunned his senses. She was magnificent, and perhaps in another life. No, this would end. Soon. And it would never be repeated. He slanted his mouth over hers once more, tormenting her left nipple with his fingers, before trailing his hand down to delve beneath the hem of her dress. He stroked up one satin-smooth thigh, the sensation of silk and lace against his fingers. The temptation to take her from the wall to the bed a few feet behind him powered through him. But he knew there was no way he could stop this if they both ended up on the bed. His fingers dipped beneath her panty line, unerringly finding her damp heat. He groaned. Is this what you want? Yes. Her words were barely audible. He stroked her, gritting his teeth against the need powering through him. The need to throw all caution to the wind and fill her up, possess her, until neither of them could breathe. Her hips jerked against his ministrations, a sweet moan falling from her lips as he stroked her, circling the bundle of nerves that made her head drop against the wall. Her eyes closed as she chased her pleasure. The picture of Amelie in the throes of passion was indescribable. This had to end. But before it did, he increased the tempo of his strokes, his hungry gaze absorbing every flicker of passion over her face, every escalation of bliss that told him she was nearing her peak. And when that peak arrived, he watched her delve headlong into rapture. Jaw clenched tight to resist taking this to the next level, joining her in that sweet climax. He waited until she quieted. Then he released his hold on her and stepped back. Amelie was grateful for the support of the wall. Otherwise, she would have crumpled to the ground. She sensed something was wrong, but she couldn't think beyond the waves of nirvana engulfing over her. Eventually, another breeze from the air conditioning shivered over her, reminding out that she was naked, her breasts on show. That Atu had retreated to the opposite side of the room, his hands braced against the wall, his head bowed. With shaky hands, she pulled up her zip and straightened her dress. As if triggered by the rustle of her clothes, he finally turned. The eyes that raked over her were icy, his jaw set in concrete. If you're about to give me a lecture on what just happened, don't bother, she said, preempting in a voice that wasn't as steady as she'd hoped. Expecting a cutting remark, she was stunned when he approached her. The look in his eyes wasn't exactly gentle, nor was it cold any longer. It was just painfully neutral. I've given you all that I can, he murmured in a tone that sounded decidedly bleak. You can go now, Amelie. But she wasn't about to turn tail and run despite every instinct warning her to leave. Atu, he shook his head. No. No more. There was a half plea buried beneath all the austerity he was projecting. She wanted to rip it all away. Dig until she found the heart of the man she knew was buried underneath. But to what end? He was right. This was what she'd wanted. But now, she wanted more. They both froze as a scream ripped through the silence. It was silent outside. Too silent. There was no music or laughter or any sound of the party they'd left behind. Atu hurried to the door and yanked it open. His long strides ate up the distance from the guest suite to the hallway that led to the living room and bar. Another scream and the sound of loud sobbing hit Amelie's ears as they arrived on the terrace. Every guest looked subdued, their eyes wide with shock as they stared at the huddled figure of Atu's mother, cradled in her husband's arms. Amelie felt a chill whisper over her bare arms as Atu breached the gap between himself and his mother. What's wrong? What's happened? When no one answered, he rounded on Ekau, his younger brother. Tell me what's going on now. His brother looked shaken, his shock laced with something harrowing Amelie didn't want to acknowledge, because she knew that the moment he spoke the words, they would be unretractable. But he said them anyway. It's Fifi. Then his eyes flickered to her. And the Hayford girl.